All right, y'all turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Cotton's laughing. Why are you laughing, Cotton? Yeah, that's right. 1 Corinthians chapter... This is a random study today. So, I want you to get two passages. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and then Ephesians chapter 5. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and then Ephesians chapter 5. Just hold both of those. All right. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We're going to read a couple verses here, and then I'll try to set this whole study up for today, and hopefully it'll land. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Come with me to verse 14. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 14. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. All right. Keep your place there in 1 Corinthians 7 because we're going to keep coming back to that. Now come with me to Ephesians chapter 5. Now, in 1 Corinthians 7 verse 14 that you just read, it essentially says, without one of the parents being sanctified, the children are unclean. Right? That's what it said. Now look with me at Ephesians chapter 5, verse 5. For this ye know, Paul says, that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater, hath any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. All right, so let me introduce what in the world we're going to talk about today. Yesterday, we were at a family gathering, and a discussion came up, and it was centered around 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 14. Okay? Let me paint the picture here. In my family, we've got a couple preachers. We've got a youth pastor and a music minister. We've got a deacon, a former deacon, Sunday school teacher, and then all the rest of us, you know. And so it's not uncommon for us to have spiritual discussions when we get together. That's actually pretty normal for us. But because we're now Big Bird, you throw Big Bird into the mix, it gets crazy, right? And what tends to happen in these family Bible discussions is it's always like, what do you think, Greg? What do you think, Big Bird? You know, what's your Big Bird word, you know? And so that always gets it, you know, gets it pretty lively and sparks fly and things like that. And it's always, we always walk away, we love each other, we're family. But a discussion came up centered around 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 14, and in the way that it was presented, or there's an interpretation of this verse that was brought up that I thought was really interesting, and I thought, this probably wouldn't be a bad study for us to tackle today. And so I immediately sort of went into overdrive and started really digging into this, and it was interesting. So let me set this up. We all believe, everybody here, to some degree or another, believe in some age of accountability. Okay? Now, I could care less what age you put it at. I'm just going to be honest with you. I could care less. Okay? I'll let you and your study of the Word determine that. Okay? I have my opinions and my, I've drawn conclusions from the Word. Okay? So that being what it is, we all believe in some age of accountability. And what we mean by that is that at some age, children become accountable to somehow make atonement for their sin. Okay? At some age, they are now responsible, okay, for atoning for the sin. And so, but if they were to die before that age, okay, this idea of age of accountability says if they die before that age, they would still be saved because by God's grace, He would impute Jesus' righteousness on them. Okay? And so they're covered. Right? Okay? Now, without diving too deep into the age of accountability stuff, there are certain passages that lend this idea that children are covered. I'll give you an example, okay? Hold your place there in 1 Corinthians 7, put your marker there. But turn back with me. We're going to look at just one verse. There are a bunch we could look at. Again, I don't want to get too far down this particular trail, but I just need to introduce the idea. Go with me to Matthew chapter 18 real quick. Matthew chapter 18. And we'll just start in verse 1. Matthew chapter 18, verse 1. At the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus called a little child unto Him, and set him in the midst of them, and said, Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. The reason why I cite this verse here is it appears that children to some degree or another are covered. They are saved regardless. Okay? And so there's an imputed righteousness there. But this is kind of where things get really interesting. Come back to 1 Corinthians 7:14 with me again, and let's read it again. 1 Corinthians 7:14. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean. In other words, if there is not one parent that is justified and sanctified. Let me start over. If there's not at least one person that is sanctified, okay, then the children are unclean, it says here. Okay? Else were your children unclean. But now he's saying to these Corinthian people who are believers who have been sanctified, their children are clean. They are holy. Alright? Now, here's my question. And this is the question I want us to sort of dive into today. Does the last part of verse 14 there, does the last part of that verse suggest that children of unsaved parents are unclean and therefore will not go to heaven if they die before the age of accountability? Let me state the question again.
Well, the last part of the verse is, but now they are holy, so...
Yeah, but listen to my question again. Listen to my question again. Okay? Is this suggesting that children of unsaved parents, okay, of unsaved parents are unclean and therefore will not go to heaven if they die before the age of accountability? Is that what the last part of that verse is suggesting? Jesus, I don't know. We don't want it to mean that. I'll just say that right now. We don't want it to mean that, do we?
Although those are small children.
Now hold on, because you're going to muddy the water real quick. Just trust me on this. Okay? Here's what happens on a question like this. Thank you for commenting. Seriously, here's what happens on a question like this. Everybody instantly gravitates towards what they think. I'm not interested in that. Okay? I can tell you in our family discussion last night, everybody gravitated towards what their opinion is. And you know what ended up happening? It became this big muddy mess. That's what happens. Or what we do need to ask is, how is the Bible defining these things? How does the Bible answer this question? Really important. Because ultimately, that's where we need to sort of set our roots. That's where we need to be grounded, right? Okay? And so, again, let me state the question again just so we're all sort of on the same page here and locked in on this. Does the last part of verse 14 there suggest that children of unsaved parents are unclean and therefore will not go to heaven if they die before the age of accountability? Because they're children, right? Now, just in case you missed it, okay? Just in case you missed it, right there in verse 14, okay? The Scripture says that children of unsaved parents are unclean, right? Right? Okay? It does say this, for the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife. Okay? In other words, you've got a mixed marriage. You've got one partner that is unsanctified, and then you've got the other that is sanctified. Okay? The one that is unsanctified is sanctified by the sanctified partner. I sound like Kamala Harris now, don't I? Gotta have some humor here, okay? Because this is going to get deep. I promise. That's why I wore boots today, right? It's going to get real deep in here. So that's what's happening. Now, it's also saying as we get on down, okay, if it weren't so where you didn't have one sanctifying the other or one sanctified parent, then the children are going to be unclean. Okay? But in the case where you have at least one parent that is sanctified, the children are clean. They're holy. And that's what it's saying. Okay? But it is saying here, children are unclean in a family where neither parent is sanctified. The children are unclean. Now, if I couple that with Ephesians 5:5, Ephesians 5:5 says, no unclean thing is going to enter the kingdom of Christ and of God. So is it telling me that that unclean child ain't going to heaven? Y'all see the conundrum? I'm not saying that is the truth. I'm asking. All right. Yes. This is interdispensational. Okay? I could broaden it to say the unclean child will not be saved. Right? Okay. So I think I've laid the problem out, right? We see the problem. So let's dig in and see if we can sort of untangle the mess, because there's a lot of moving parts to this thing. There's a lot of layers to this, I'll grant you that. And again, it can get really confusing. So let's start with some context of verse 14, because I think this is really important. Because what you've got all these moving parts. And the primary context is about the marriage relationship first. Okay? But there's something we need to pick up on that I think is hugely important. And if you don't pick up on this, you'll miss all of it. Okay? So look with me starting back in verse 10. Look what it says here. By the way, 1 Corinthians, who wrote 1 Corinthians? The Apostle Paul. Okay? Now, you as a rightly divider, instantly, that should indicate something very important. Well, what would it indicate? Is this stuff you're going to find elsewhere in the Bible? It is part and parcel of the revelation given to the Apostle Paul, known as the mystery, which was hid in God, right? Okay, now it's revealed. Okay, so automatically when you're in 1 Corinthians, you need to go, context, okay, wait. If this is the Apostle Paul, this is unique. Okay, so let's read verse 10. And he says, and unto the married I command, now look at this language, yet not I, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband. But, and if she depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. This is what the Lord has commanded. In the past, the Lord has commanded that you don't need to divorce. Okay? If you do, remain unmarried or be reconciled. That's what that was under the Lord's ministry. Okay? And He says, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. Verse 11, and let not the husband put away his wife. Verse 12, but to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. In other words, just because the spouse discovers, oh, my spouse is unbelieving, and they waited to marriage to discover this, okay? Don't just go, oh, well, I don't want you anymore. Okay? Verse 13, and the woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. Okay, now here's the reason why I bring up these verses, especially verse 10 and verse 12. This is very important context. In these verses, again, this makes an impact on how we interpret verse 14. But look what verse 10 says. Verse 10, Paul says, I command, yet not I, but the Lord. Then in verse 12 he says, speak I, not the Lord. So there are some things that the Lord has commanded, but now there are some things that the Apostle Paul has commanded. The Lord never spoke them or preached them, so to speak, in His earthly ministry. Okay? That's important. Okay? And so what's the significance of that? What does that mean? Now remember, when Jesus was on the earth, His preaching and His teaching was according to the law of Moses to Israel. Here's how I know. Y'all just hang with me. We're going to go through the weeds, okay? So y'all keep your marker here. Go with me to Galatians chapter 4. Y'all have all seen this before. We're going to review some of this, okay? Galatians 4. Now, in verse 10 back there, 1 Corinthians 7, Paul reminds these Corinthians, he tells these Corinthians what the Lord has preached in the past. Okay, this is what the Lord has commanded. And then we get down to verse 12 and he says, but this is now what I say, not the Lord. Okay? Alright. And what's significant about that is, and what it means is that Jesus' commands are going to be slightly different than Paul's, and that makes a big impact. Now, Jesus' ministry was according to the law of Moses. Look what it says in Galatians 4:4. But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth His Son. Who was that? Okay, Jesus. Made of a woman. Now what's the next part? Made under the law. Okay, let me ask you a question. When Jesus was born, was it Old Testament or New Testament times? Okay? When Jesus was alive and preaching and teaching, were they still under the law? Yes, that's what it says right there. What do you think Jesus is going to preach then? The law. How do we know that? Because I've told y'all. Take a left turn, go back to Romans chapter 15. Now, it's significant not just that Jesus was under the law and even teaching the laws we're going to learn here, but to whom He was teaching these commands, okay? And teaching them to obey, all right? Romans chapter 15, verse 8. Paul says, now I say that Jesus Christ was a minister of whom? The circumcision. Who is that? Israel, the Jews, right? God's covenant people, right? Who were under the law and who were instructed to obey the law and to be separate, to be holy, to be all these things, okay? He says, Jesus Christ was a minister of the circumcision for the truth of God, to confirm the promises made unto the fathers. So what does that tell us? Okay? when we see Jesus' commands concerning whatever, marriage, family, guess what? Jesus is teaching the Jews, a people that were supposed to be separate and different than all of us heathen, how to have marriage and family under the law. Okay? That's what He was teaching. Alright? And so, what that means is that the rules Jesus would have commanded concerning all those things, marriage, sanctification, cleanliness, all those sorts of things, were according to the Old Testament law and regulated Jews. And it dictated this: Jews were to marry Jews. The Old Testament law regulated that Jewish mamas and Jewish daddies were to teach their Jewish children, okay, the Word. Particularly at that point, the Hebrew Scriptures, the law. Okay? And that was unique and distinct. Let me show you this. Take a left turn, go all the way back to Deuteronomy chapter 7. Y'all with me so far? Everybody with me? So everybody just lean in. They're like, okay, so what's the point? What's the answer? Right? Just be patient. Deuteronomy chapter 7. So when you go back to Deuteronomy, we're going to look into Old Testament law and Jewish rites and rituals, okay? Again, this is God's chosen people, His covenant people. His whole aim with them is to channel His blessing through them to the whole world. But to do that, they had to be purified, cleansed, holied up. Okay? And the law was a part of that process. Okay? Now, look what the law did. Deuteronomy chapter 7. Let's start reading in verse 1. When the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and the Mosquitobites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. Okay? And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them, neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly. But thus shall ye deal with them. Ye shall destroy their altars, and break down their images, and cut down their groves, and burn their graven images with fire. For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto Himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. All right, let me ask you a question. Were the Jewish people supposed to intermarry with the heathens? Right? Okay. When Jesus comes along, He is under the law. He is a minister to the circumcision for the truth of God to confirm the promises made unto the fathers. Do you think all of a sudden He's going to change course and tell the Jews, okay, y'all can start marrying Gentiles? He never spoke such things. Those things were unheard of. They did not have mixed marriages. Okay? All right, so just keep that in mind. All right, go with me to chapter 25, Deuteronomy chapter 25. This was so extreme, this idea that they were not to intermarry, that let's say Norm is my brother. Okay, he's the only brother I got. And let's say I'm married to Claire, but we don't have any children. This is so extreme. He wanted to keep it within the Jewish bloodline that if something had happened to me and I were to die, Norm was to take the responsibility and then help produce progeny. Okay? This is extreme. Okay? And here's the reason why. God was forming a nation that was separate. All right? Look at verse 5. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5. If brethren dwell together, and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. They're going to be available. They're probably going to come to call. But that's not who she's supposed to hook up with. Okay? Her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her. That's how extreme this was. This is important to God. Okay? Go with me to Leviticus chapter 11. Take a left turn. Go back. Sorry, I got out of order there. Exodus, Leviticus chapter 11. Verse 44. For I am the Lord your God. Ye shall therefore sanctify... Somebody say something. Leviticus 11:44. For I am the Lord your God. Ye shall therefore sanctify yourselves, and ye shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall ye defile yourselves with any manner of creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Those creeps. You know what the creepiest things were? It wasn't just animals, certain animals. It was, that's right, you got it. The Gentiles. Here's how we know. Take a right turn now, go all the way over to Acts chapter 10. Acts chapter 10. Now, Peter was a Jew. He was trained in the Jewish law, the Mosaic law. He was trained in the ways. Peter knew he wasn't supposed to mingle. Wasn't supposed to eat creepy animals, and he wasn't supposed to mingle with creepy people. You creeps. There is some humor here, right? Well, guess what happens? Something is happening dispensationally. The Apostle Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, who later was to become Paul, has just been converted, and that was setting a pattern. Now God was beginning a new dispensation. Peter was about to be informed of this in a very unique way. One way is that God gave him a vision of a sheet coming out of heaven with all these forbidden animals on it. And God's telling him, eat it, eat it. Well, here's Peter, a Jew, going, no, God, that stuff's forbidden. I'm not going to put that. And God keeps telling him, no, eat it, eat it, eat it. Well, then he gets called to a heathen's house. And then it clicks. Wait, God's doing something different. Okay? And we're in the story here in Acts chapter 10, and come all the way down to verse 28. Well, come to verse 23, we'll get a little context. Then called he them in and lodged them, and on the morrow Peter went away with them, that is, these people from Cornelius' household, and certain brethren from Joppa accompanied him. And the morrow after they entered into Caesarea, and Cornelius awaited for them, and had called together his kinsmen and near friends, all these Gentiles. And here comes the Jew. And as Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter took him up, saying, Stand up, I myself also am a man. And as he talked with him, he went in and found many that were come together. I can imagine in that moment, that was the most awkward thing for Peter. He's not supposed... Jesus himself said, don't go into the way of the Samaritans. He said, don't. I'm not sending you to those people. And now all of a sudden, here he is. He is in the wrong place. Okay? And he comes in. Now look at verse 28. And he said unto them, Ye know how that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation. Peter's holding to this. The Jews were not supposed to intermingle in any way. At this point, though, God's now starting something different, and Peter starts to wake up to it. He says, "But God has showed me that I should not call any man common," or what? Things have changed. See, in the dispensation of the grace of God, which had now been initiated by this point, Acts chapter 10, because back in Acts chapter 9, Paul had been converted, thus sparking a new dispensation. Now there's neither Jew nor Gentile. That distinction is meaningless. Circumcised, uncircumcised makes no difference. That is meaningless. Okay? Now, the reason why I bring this up is when Jesus came to the earth and He ministered, and in 1 Corinthians 7, Paul is pointing back to the commands that Jesus gave concerning marriage. He was pointing back to a time when Jesus commanded things about marriage, but it was only Jew and Jew. Okay? At that point in the Scriptures, there wasn't any direction on, well, what if you do have a mixed marriage with a believer to an unbeliever? Or a Jew to a Gentile? There was none of that. Okay? And so Paul comes on the scene. So, who was the Apostle Paul commissioned to minister to? How do you know? Don't y'all love when I ask that? It's so mean. So y'all take a right turn. Go with me to Romans. There's a lot of passages we could look at, but I'll give you one with just some low-hanging fruit here. Romans 11. All right, so let me keep y'all sort of in the realm here. Jesus was sent to minister to Jews. He was to minister to them principles about marriage, sanctification, cleanliness, and all this stuff according to the law of Moses. Then Paul comes along. Who's he sent to? Romans 11:13. For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify in mine office. Peter, James, John, the other 12 were never commissioned to go to the Gentiles like that. Paul was the one. Okay? Now, if Paul is ministering to Gentiles, let me ask you a question. Is he going to teach them to observe whatsoever things the Lord has commanded? Now, see, isn't that an interesting question? Okay? Is Paul going to instruct Gentiles now, today, under the dispensation of the grace of God, to observe the law of Moses? No, why not? It's a whole different system. And we're not Israel, are we? Okay? Those principles, rules, laws, things were for a different direction and goal in mind, for a different people. It's not that there's no value. Let me be very careful here. Y'all understand me. If you go back and read the Old Testament law, it's not that if you decide you want to conduct your life according to those things, you're actually going to be a pretty pristine person if you can actually do it. Okay? I'm not saying it's not a good thing and that you should just disregard it and that you should never try to seek, to have some moral purity in your life according to the law. It's not that. Okay? So I'm not saying that at all, but what I am saying is when Paul came along, his commission, his goal, and his mission as an apostle to the Gentiles was not to bring them under the law to make them another people like Israel. That was never given to him. Okay? And so Paul is he's ministering in a different way. Here's how we know this. Take a left turn and go back with me to Matthew chapter 15 real quick. Part of the way that we know Paul wasn't sent to teach Gentiles to observe whatsoever the Lord commanded is because when the Lord came, the Lord didn't come to teach Gentiles. Okay? Look at Matthew chapter 15, verse 24. But Jesus answered and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Okay? So that's part of the reason why the Apostle Paul is not going to direct Gentiles to obey commands concerning marriage and all this other stuff and family like Jesus taught, because Jesus' ministry was not to Gentiles. It was to Jews, and again to confirm promises made to the fathers. Okay? Now, go with me now to Romans chapter 6. I got y'all flipping now. What time have I got? Oh, this is working out good. I think I might actually finish this first half. Romans chapter 6, and look at verse 14. This is one that, probably would be a good one to memorize. You've heard it, but, it'd be a good one to hang on to. And this, again, Romans is this wonderful dispensational treatise. It's sort of written like a legal argument. But Paul says in verse 14, "For sin shall not have dominion over you." But why is that? Well, the reason is because it's a different policy system now. And he says here, "For ye are not under the law, but under" what? Grace. Paul comes along now, and he's going to preach law? No, what is he going to preach? Grace. He even instructs Timothy, when you get over into 2 Timothy, he says, "Be strong in the grace." Okay? We are to be strong in grace and not press law. Why? Because today we're not under that policy system. We're under the policy system of grace. Go with me to Ephesians chapter 3. Again, this is sort of belaboring the point that when Paul does begin to preach and teach Gentiles, it's not what the Lord taught. It's a different thing. Ephesians chapter 3. Look at verse 2. Paul says, "If ye have heard of the dispensation of the grace of God, which is given me to you word." I like how the King James does that. It's headed to your direction, Gentiles. Okay? This is unique. How that by revelation He made known unto me the mystery. Drop down to verse 5. "Which in other ages was not made known unto the sons of men, as it is now revealed unto His holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit." So again, Paul's ministry to the Gentiles is not going to be equivalent to the words and commands of the Lord Jesus to the Jews. It's going to be different. Okay? Go take a left turn, go back with me to Galatians 1. Again, I know y'all have seen these before. I think it's important for us to have this repetition. Verse 11. Galatians 1 verse 11. Paul writes, "But I certify you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached of me is not after man, for I neither received it." And by the way, was Paul a Jew? Yes. Did he learn all the Hebrew traditions? Yeah, he says he was a Hebrew among Hebrews, right? In all points of the law, faultless. I mean, he had it letter for letter, word for word. He nailed it, right? So now all of a sudden he's saying, "I didn't receive this." This is a whole different ball of wax, he says. Verse 12, "For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ." So this is a revelation from Jesus Christ. So, come back now to 1 Corinthians 7. We're going to put a tiny bow on this, and then we'll take a break. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So now Paul is writing by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit to these people in Corinth. Okay? And he's writing under the dispensation of the grace of God to Gentiles, not Jews. And the revelation you see recorded here in 1 Corinthians is not Old Testament law. And so that's why Paul says in verse 12, "But to the rest speak I, not the Lord." Okay? He's saying that because the Lord never spoke what is following here. Because the Lord never taught the revelation of the mystery, the information that was given in the revelation of the mystery. The Lord taught the law. And He taught that to Israel. And it regulated things like their marriages and their families, issues of sanctification and cleanliness, purification, all those things. Okay? Paul, though, here is saying, this is me speaking now, not the Lord, because his message is now different. Now, why does that matter? Okay, this is kind of what y'all been leaning toward a little bit, and I'm going to tease it. We're going to get some coffee and get our brain waking up again. It matters because now that Paul is ministering to us heathen Gentiles, there are marriage and family issues that have to be dealt with that Jesus, under the law, never dealt with. That things that were forbidden. Jews were forbidden to marry Gentiles. Okay? There were no such things as mixed marriages. Within Israel, they were all under the law. They were all performing these rituals and ceremonies and things like that. And so there was an equal yoke there. Now, we're outside that. Okay? You got all kinds of craziness happen. Especially when you release this stuff to the Gentiles, we just take it and we mess it up. Okay? It gets all crazy, right? And so... So again, but under the policy of grace now, there's no distinction between Jew and Gentile. There's mixed marriages. So now we need some guidance. Okay? We need guidance on mixed marriages and then what that means for their children. And so what happens when an unbeliever is married to a believer? And as it relates to our topic today in particular, what does it mean for their children? Now, as it turns out, in the Old Testament, there was a plan, and we're going to see this especially in the second half. There was a plan for sanctifying children. When you go back to the Mosaic Law, which Jesus taught that, there was a plan for sanctifying children. But now, we're dealing with Gentiles under grace and children in marriages that are mixed. Right? So, how do children today get sanctified? When we come back from the break, that's what we'll look at.